Okay, yeah, so welcome to the second edition of our podcast. Yeah, today we're going to talk about our experience during the lockdown. Rabwon, you're going to tell us how you found the lockdown. Was it interesting, especially you who lost your job? Did you lose your job, or you retained part of the job? You can let me in on what happened during
I did not lose the job. I retained the job, but I was on an unpaid leave for as long as the lockdown lasted.
And you guys left school in, is it March? I think in March, when the president told everyone to leave school, everyone left school. So you guys just, were they paying you during that time, or you are getting part of the salary?
Okay, March was paid and April was paid, but later on there was no payment. So it was literally going for an unpaid holiday for as long as the lockdown lasted.
That's why in the journalism field, most of my friends were stopped from working. So I think most of the guys had to return when that big lock. Do you remember when the first lockdown was partially lifted? Do you remember the time? Because we entered the big the main full control lockdown in March, but I don't still recall the time when they eased it a bit. Do you remember the month when it was eased a little bit?
For sure on that one. We were locked many times as we were opened many times, and sometimes some sectors would remain open, others would remain closed. So based on the number of times the lockdown happened or the country was locked and open, I really do not remember when it was, but I just remember that we all were opened twice, the sector of education, but otherwise most of the times much of it was in the lockdown.
It was really a tough experience. People had to walk up from Kampala up to Mbari. Someone told me a story of their relative that walked up to Mbari. So now, like,
that sounds unrealistic.
It's unrealistic, but good. People suffered during that time. Now, to talk about what happened during that time, there were anticipations that some teachers would not return to school because most of them decided to switch new professions. Some decided to go and start farming, others joined new sectors. I have a friend on LinkedIn who is a teacher. He's now working with Safeboard because during that period, he was in a school that couldn't afford to pay him. So Safeboard started calling people to act as agents to help them recruit new people. You know, they have rolled out a lot of services these days. They're in mobile money. They wanted more border guys. So the guy started as an agent, and now he's one of the main staff at Safeboard. So there were speculations, and of course some people knew that teachers would not manage to come back to school because, of course, even some schools shut down. I saw a school, I think somewhere in Sasintinda somewhere, a school was turned into an apartment. So a lot of things changed in the education system. Do you think a lot of teachers decided to abandon teaching, or most of them returned to the education system?
Okay, on that one, I think we need to first understand what it is that people must have learned by the time the lockdown came. Of course, it is not something that we were warned about, maybe to give you ample time to prepare. But if there is anything that I have learned from the lockdown, are things that I studied in school but did not take seriously. For example, I did not know that the main reason or the most important lessons or things I must have learned from school were how to read, how to write, how to think, and how to speak. Now, when the lockdown came, those ones who had acquired those 4 skills did not suffer as much as those ones who did not take those 4 skills seriously. For example, in the lockdown, there are those ones who lost their jobs simply because they had to report to the jobs physically. But there are those ones who got new jobs. For example, e-commerce, electronic commerce. You're selling things online. There are those ones who got new jobs, for example, teaching online, using edutech platforms designed for teaching online. Then there are those ones who in the lockdown wrote books. There are those ones who in the lockdown read enough material to open up their mind. In other words, if you knew how to read, today internet makes it possible for everyone to access any kind of information, including almost every kind of book you can think about on internet. So if you're someone who knows how important reading is, you use the phone to get that book and read it. In the lockdown, there are those ones who could have read. as much as 10 books, 50 books, 100 books, depending on their interest on reading. There are those ones who had interest in writing, that by the time we moved out of the lockdown, they had already finished a book about a certain topic, either about the lockdown itself, the experiences in the lockdown, or about any other thing. In other words, it was a time for some people to find something they were passionate about but did not know. For example, if someone was passionate about writing but did not know, lockdown gave such people enough time to do the reading, to do the writing. Then two, those ones who knew how to speak. Now the lockdown brought something known as Zoom, where people were holding meetings, conferences, and other kind of conferences that required someone to speak. If someone was good at speaking, they got jobs to either cancel those ones who were in the lockdown or locked down but couldn't access some counseling services elsewhere or some. And then those ones who could think, obviously used that opportunity of the lockdown to think of something else they could do if at all there is anyone who could have lost the job. Now, thinking includes analyzing the situation, knowing that if you're given 21 days, what is it that you can do in the 21 days? That at least by the time the 21 days ends, you have something you're going to dwell on, either if for eating or something that can enable you go to another level of that. So in other words, in the lockdown, I learned a lot, including reading, writing, and thinking. And it's the time that I used to find my passion. And I realized that I'm so passionate about technology. And it's the time that I actually gave my startup. And it's the time that I really found something that I was so passionate about. And that was how to use the skills I acquired in the university, teaching in education, on how I can make the learners continue learning even if they were in the lockdown. And that was by using the available technologies like the e-learning platforms, EduTech, Classroom, Zoom, etc., to make the learners study amid the lockdown. So those teachers who lost their jobs, yes, it would be unfair to say that they did not think hard enough. But those ones who surely thought hard enough did not care about losing the job. In other words, they are those ones who could have made more than they would have made if there was no lockdown. So, yes, things happened, but it's only for those ones who did not take the 4 skills I talked about, the reading, writing, thinking, and speaking, that actually suffered in this lockdown.
Are there some of your friends that weren't able to come back to school, or most of the teachers that you are teaching with came back and they are teaching? Like the teachers you are teaching with before the lockdown, did they all come back, or some of them have decided to try some new things? Because in my case in journalism and the things I do, some of the people that I was working with, some were laid off and decided to switch professions. Some got luck and got better jobs. Some have yet to return to work. The lockdown, of course, it was a two-way thing. Like, you know, life is binary. There are always good and bad things. There are people who actually benefited from the lockdown because some suffered and experienced real suffering for the first time, and their eyes opened up. Because if you are a person who had a family, maybe you had a wife, you have kids, they need to go to school, you had to find a way of making them eat. Because your wife is not going to stay around if you can't afford to support her. So people had to find ways of surviving, and some getting laid off brought that urge to work hard, that urge to think harder, and some actually benefited from it and they are doing better jobs. But there are those who have never recovered from it. So on your side, do you think, have you heard of cases where some of your friends told you they weren't able to come back, or are there some of those that left for the profession for better things? What was the experience like from the people you know, or from things you've heard from friends?
Okay. From what I know, I do not know many people who quit education for other professions amid the lockdown. And mainly, that is because by the time a person makes a choice to go and study education, whatever reason that is, is so huge, so big that a person cannot overcome it. In other words, the moment a person makes the choice to do education, it's very hard for that same person to leave education unless they work hard enough and go back to university to study a new course or another course that will eventually take them to another profession. But I haven't seen many people leaving education for other professions because education is in a noble sector. In other words, everyone can live, can survive when they are in it. So there are not many people who left education. If I know many, there are two.
You know, like only two.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because there was a lot of fear, and I wonder because for the schools that closed, I wonder where those teachers are. Maybe they got other, because I'm sure there are people maybe who could have started schools immediately after the lockdown, and maybe those were absorbed by those things, or maybe because we are in town and people who have kids in most of these urban schools have money, and most of these schools returned, or some of the schools in urban school, like most of the schools in the city, had some financial muscle to keep supporting the teachers. So that's why maybe you don't know about it, or it actually did happen. So yeah, I guess that's maybe the reason. But yeah, the lockdown was really fire. The most interesting thing again I observed was how people were worried about the virus, with all the data that was swimming around, and how people could easily access information, but most of the people are still scared. Do you think, according to you, do you think people learned to trust data during that period, or if we face another pandemic in the future, people would still get scared and not listen to information that tells them not to worry about certain things, especially diseases? Do you think people fear diseases a lot, and when they come around, it's easier for them to use a disease or such an incident to scare them and force them to do things they wouldn't do normally? Or do you think someone could use information to help people understand something?
Okay, before I answer that question, but do you agree that more than 95% of the people are timid about something?
Something that causes fear, something, what's something are you trying to
Something that causes fear.
I don't know about percentages, but what I know is that you can easily use fear to manipulate people to do what they want.
Okay.
What you want.
What I learned in the lockdown is that people are so timid that even when you come with conclusive evidence that something is not as dangerous as people say it is, if it is being enforced by someone feared or someone powerful, people will always follow what that person who is feared is saying. In other words, those ones who had the powers drove almost everything. For example, the companies that were making the vaccines are almost the same companies that were pushing people into the lockdown, either directly or indirectly, scaring everyone that there is no way out of the pandemic unless everyone is vaccinated, even when there is evidence that you can acquire the virus even when you're vaccinated. So what was it that they were saying, that the only way out was to vaccinate? Eventually, time came and they used that as an excuse to open up. But I think it's not the vaccination that could have resulted into the fall in the cases of the vaccine. So I think people are created to fear someone who is powerful, someone who has maybe considered a leader, for example.
Yeah, thanks for Rabwon. This was yet another interesting podcast. We've exchanged good points, and yeah, I think our listeners will maybe find this interesting. If you have anything you want to ask us as we prepare for our next podcast, feel free to check our comment section, and share your information, then we shall be able to respond in the coming podcast. Thank you so much.
By the way, you should not forget to remind them to subscribe.
Yeah, please
To
subscribe
like,
to our
thumbs
channel,
up.
like, and you can also share with your friends to come and watch our podcast.
Especially if they find the information more useful to
Yeah,
them.
yeah. Please spread the information, and that will also encourage us to come up with more things for you people. Bye.
Okay.